Richard Skipper celebrates. Every show is a celebration. Each show, Richard delivers the artists you love, showcasing what makes them unique. Never gossipy. The antidote to a sometimes hectic world. Now, here's your host, Richard Skipper.
Happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Richard Skipper Celebrates. This is the show in which I celebrate artists and their body of worth. And we have a lot of artists that we're going to celebrate today, which I'm very excited about. But before I bring our very special guest on, Ron Fassler, I'd like to talk a little bit about my childhood. I grew up in a small town in South Carolina named Conway. I always used to say I'm going from Conway to Broadway. I said that to anyone who would listen to me. I was obsessed with the theater. I learned about the theater through my local theater company, the Theater of the Republic. I auditioned for my first show in 1973, and I was cast in the chorus of MAME. I had a wonderful mentor, Florence Epps. She took me under her wings, and every Wednesday and Thursday afternoon, I would go to her little playhouse behind her house, and we would read from the classics. We would read biographies, autobiographies, and we would read anything about the theater. If I came across a name that I didn't know, she would say, okay, tell me 3 things about that person. Now, remember, this is in the days before Google. And I would have to run to the library if I didn't know who they were and come back the following week with 3 facts about that person. She also instilled upon me that every time I walked on stage, every time I came before a camera, I was carrying the mantle of every great artist that had ever gone before me on my shoulders. And I've never forgotten that. One night I was watching some talk show and they were talking about Hirschfeld. And they said that in Hirschfeld, he used to draw little Ninas in honor of his daughter, Nina. And they would give a number as to the number of Ninas in each Hirschfeld. So every Saturday afternoon, when my parents would go shopping, they would drop me off at the Conway Library, and I would go in, and the first stop would be to go to the New York Times, go to the Hirschfeld from the previous Sunday's paper, and count all the Ninas. And I also read about all the Broadway shows. And while I was reading about those things and dreaming of a life in New York, and I came to New York on August 5th, 1979, at the age of 18, but our guest today, Ron Fassler, he was living the dream as a kid growing up in New York. He knew what his playground was, and he played in that playground up in the cheap seats, as you're going to learn more and more about him today. Before I bring him on, I'd like to give a little glimpse. He'll tell you a little bit about what his show is about, and then we'll talk in a moment about his book.
From 1969 to 73, when I went into the city every week and saw a Broadway show, 4 years, 200 shows at a basically average price of $3. It just doesn't exist anymore. And it was an incredible education for me. I wanted to be an actor. I got to see acting of every stripe. I got to make my own opinions about the plays and the musicals. That's when I would go home and write my reviews. I know a few of you have read my book, and I printed a few, but tonight I'm going to share some reviews that are not in the book. I was trying so hard to be erudite and sound like Brendan Gill in The New Yorker, and I missed it because I was 12. When I reviewed Company, the great company, which broke so much new ground, but I couldn't get behind these 30-somethings and their problems. I was 14. And the same went for Follies. You know, here's what I wrote about, actually, this is what I wrote about Follies. The book is the weak spot, but it's a pageant, spelled wrong, more than a story. I said, Stephen Sondheim has written some good number. Of MAME, I wrote a joyful romp through such misadventures that it really makes you happy. I was 12. Ann Miller is at her happy best as the only woman to live through the Depression and make people feel good. Now, who doesn't want to see a show like that? So sit back and relax to Tales from Up in the Cheap Seats. Though not so much a kid, these memories keep him young. a time of Broadway reminisce, talked and even sung.
Ron Fassler, I am such a fan of yours. It is such an honor that you are sitting here today, hopefully not in a cheap seat. And we're going to just celebrate our love of the theater. Now, I do want to begin today's show by putting us in perspective with where we are right now. Today marks 376 days since our theaters shut down. This would be a matinee day in the theater. And I want to ask, how are you doing really in the midst of this crazy world we find ourselves in?
Well, my mantra has been, can't complain, could complain, won't complain. Now it's been 13 months, so it's wearing thin. My very last show was the Wednesday matinee, March 12th, before everything shut down on the 13th. So it's funny you should mention today as a matinee day, because that was the last show I saw. It was Jagged Little Pill. And I would say that probably this year is the first year I haven't seen a play since I was around 10 years old. And that's hard to believe, but I've kept it up. The passion's been there since I was a little boy. And I was actually quite touched by your introduction, Richard, because I just found out last night that one of my instrumental teachers in high school passed away yesterday at the age of 87.
What's her name? Let's celebrate her.
Her name was Diane Martindale, and she was the choral teacher. And we did concerts year round, and she always directed the musicals we did. And I have so many memories of spending time with her, learning how to sing songs and learning proper, even opera technique, because my high school did a full-scale opera every year. La Boheme, Tales of Hoffmann, Prince Igor, every year with sets and the full orchestra and all the actors.
I was happy with the happy little romp called Mame.
Yes, everybody was happy with Mame, but we were ambitious. We even did, when I was in high school, we did Marat Sade. That is not your average high school.
The persecution and assassination of Jean-Paul Marat as performed by the inmates of Sheridan Asylum under the direction of the Marquis de Sade. For those of you who don't know the full title, yeah. I know that because I played the Herald in that production at the University of South Carolina.
What part do you think I played?
Were you Marat?
I was the Herald.
You were the Herald?
We got a lot in common.
Do you remember the opening monologue?
I remember it ended with me raising my arms and saying, "Homage to Marat."
That's
that was
right.
The only line I remember.
I cannot believe this. Already seated in his face, there was Marat. Observe his face.
Well, I'm grateful for it. I mean, with budget cuts and things like that, I mean, it's just a terrible thing now that kids aren't getting that kind of an education that you and I got. I mean, we did a children's play. We did a drama. We did a winter concert, a spring concert. We did a full-fledged musical and an opera every year. I mean, by the time I was 18 and went to college, between that and some summer stock gigs, I had 35 plays under my belt. And that, well, actually, it put me in terrible stead. I had so many bad habits. That was the first thing they did, was try and break me of them at acting school, right?
Let's go there. What was one of the worst habits that you had before you actually went into acting school?
Well, acting.
Good answer.
All I did was act. And we all know now that acting is behavior, and acting is listening, and acting is getting as relaxed as you possibly can, and releasing tension. And these are still things I'm still working on, because every actor does. Because to get to that place is it's a lot of work. I know that people think that acting, is an easy job. It sure looks like one, and you get well paid for it. But sometimes you have one job a year, and that has to sustain you for the entire year. But it's a very tough profession, and the work is very hard. And sometimes you're not quite aware of the damage it does, and how strong you have to be as an actor. And one of the big problems is that acting attracts very sensitive souls. So there are some who can't handle it, some who drop out, some who turned to drugs and alcohol. The theater and the film and television community are littered with people who have had a very hard time at success. And in fact, I'm sure that you probably begged your parents to go professional at a young age. Please take me to a professional audition. My parents wouldn't hear of it. They were like, nope, do your school plays. And they did me a tremendous favor because...
Well, you have the luxury, excuse me for interrupting, but you have the luxury of being so close to New York. I mean, being here, I grew up on a tobacco farm in South Carolina.
Yeah, we're agents walking down your hometown.
And for me to go to my parents and say, I'm going to go into show business, they thought I was speaking, as I say in my show, as if I was speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
Something that they do quite frequently in South Carolina.
Yes. Well, I mean, they did me a favor because I think modestly, I think I probably would have gotten some jobs, and I don't think I could have handled it. I was too immature. And I think I would have been one of those casualties, You would have tuned into one of those entertainment broadcasts. Where is Ron Fassler now? After his stunning success as a little boy on,
Well, you also had something in your family tree that I didn't have, and that was an Aunt Helen.
Yes.
And your Aunt Helen taking you to the theater to see I Do, which was your first theatrical experience, although it didn't begin there. It began with you. I've got a photograph here because I got a poster from Radio City Music Hall.
Oh, look at that.
Where you saw The Music Man.
That's right.
And that moment was a life-changing moment for you because of Robert Preston.
Yeah. Most young actors or even young sports stars, can point to the athlete or the grown-up who showed them the way. And for me, it was Robert Preston. And for anybody who knows The Music Man and knows Robert Preston, it's one of those performances that is just indelible and almost impossible to top. It was just that right place, right time. He was, a guy who'd been in show business for over 20 years. He had never done a musical. And he suddenly showed up one day, to everybody's amazement, as the perfection of a song and dance man, with charisma to burn. And he did that show for 2 years on Broadway. He got to do the movie. I've always wondered, if the movie was Frank Sinatra or Cary Grant or the people they were talking about, would I have worshipped them? Would they have been my idols? And I can't answer it. I don't know. But Robert Preston was the whole reason that after seeing Music Man at 5 years old, I started to open the arts and leisure section of the New York Times on a Sunday. Because maybe there's an article about my favorite actor, Robert Preston. In those days, there were no video stores. If you wanted to watch a movie, you had to wait for it to come on television.
That's right.
Very cut up, bastardized, black and white. I had no color TV till I was around 14. And that's how I watched him in Dark at the Top of the Stairs and other movies he did. And, I just, whatever I could get. And so at 10 years old, he came back to Broadway in a smash musical, I Do. His co-star was Mary Martin. Here was my chance, there you go, to see Robert Preston, The Music Man, Mary Martin, Peter Pan, in a Broadway show. And I begged my parents, and I had 5 brothers and sisters. So, if they took me to a Broadway show, they were going to have to take another one to a Broadway show or something commiserate. So it was my aunt. It was my mother's aunt, my great Aunt Helen, who knew what it meant to me. And so one night she took me to Broadway to see I Do. And then from that night on, I was...
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. You were seated in the theater. She's going to be seated a couple of rows behind you.
She couldn't get seats together. It was such a hit. She just grabbed 2 great seats. And my seat was as good as you could get. It was about the 10th row center.
But there was a great buzz around you.
Well, I tell it in the prologue to the book because it's such an extraordinary story. I was in that theater, and from the moment I sat down, I just kept looking around at everything that was happening to me. It was my first time in a Broadway theater, and the orchestra's tuning, but there's a buzz in the air. I mean, it sounded like music. People were just so excited, and I figured that's what it's like every night in the theater. At intermission, when it was over and I turned around to look at my aunt, this is what my aunt was doing from her seat. When I caught up with her in the lobby, she said, "Don't you know who's sitting in front of you?" And I said, "Oh, the lady with the big hair?" She said, "Yes, the lady with the big hair. That's Lady Bird Johnson." She was then First Lady of the United States. And I was surrounded by Secret Service. And I didn't know, but all of that attention of everybody looking at Lady Bird, they weren't looking at the boy in G112. They were looking at the woman in F112, right? And of course, at intermission, my aunt said, "We're switching seats." So she took the seat, and the first thing that happened was one of the Secret Service men said, "Where's the little boy?"
The one who knows all the lyrics to all the songs.
At the time, he knows all the words. But it was a magical night, and I'm so grateful to her for that. And
well, I want to say, reading these stories, and especially starting there, I mean, I had the good fortune of having as a dear friend, as I'm sure you know, my dear friend Carol. And but it seems almost as if he was almost like this guardian angel over you, because all of these incredible things that happen, with your father getting the autograph. And then I also think that, after his death and you sitting down to write your thoughts about him, that it opened up this additional career for you as a writer. You're an amazing writer, but you tell in the book about the gift that you got from Mrs. Preston, which I will share. And we're not going to give away everything in the book, folks. These are just teasers to get you to buy the book. But if you can take us there.
Well, what happened was when Robert Preston died, out of sheer coincidence, where do you think I was? I was at a screening of Peter Pan that Mary Martin herself introduced in Los Angeles. So I was clapping for Tinkerbell and having this nostalgic night there. That was the first time I saw Mary Martin in person since I had seen her in I Do, 20 years earlier when I was 10 years old. And when I got home from this wonderful evening, my answering machine was lit up. Remember answering machines? And 12 messages. And it was all of my friends going, "Are you okay? Are you okay? I'm so sorry Robert Preston died." And this is how I found out. And I burst into tears. It was like losing someone I knew, even though I never knew him. But because he was such an influence on me. And let's not forget, I was a professional actor. I was working in Los Angeles. I was getting a lot of roles in film and television. It was my dream that I might work with him one day, So, of course, his death meant that was over. And at the time, my wife, said to me, "You should do something with your grief. You should write what he meant to you. Write it. And maybe the New York Times will publish it, or maybe Playbill." And that's exactly what I did, Richard. I wrote this piece, and the Times rejected it, but Playbill published it on a full page in Playbill, which they used to have a column for a while called A View from the Audience. And they published it in a Playbill a few months after he died. And it was a nice piece. And a friend of mine who read it said, "Hey, you got to send this to Mrs. Preston." Because Robert Preston was married to Catherine Craig, an actress he met when he was very young at the Pasadena Playhouse, and they were together their whole lives. And so I wrote to Mrs. Preston, and I sent her the article, and I just, maybe hoped she'd write me back. Well, I mailed that, I'll never forget this, at a mailbox on Wednesday. I sent her the article. On Friday, I go to my mailbox, and there is a package, an envelope, and the return address says Preston. And I open it up, and it's this beautiful letter where she says to me, I really loved your article. And she just said some very touching personal things. And then she said, "It dawned on me that you should have this. It's been hanging on Bob's study wall ever since the night you and Lady Bird saw I Do, I Do." So if you'll wait here, oh, you've got it. There it is. I was going to go into where it's hanging in my hallway.
I'm prepared for you.
So there it is. That is a photograph that hung in Robert Preston's study until he died, and it now hangs in my hall. And it commemorates the first night I ever went to the theater, and I owned something of Robert Preston's. It was the most magnanimous gesture anybody had ever done for me. It meant so much. And a lesson, of course, is that out of grief comes something positive.
Absolutely.
I took my grief, I did something positive with it. I was bold enough. I sent her this article, and she had the generosity of spirit to say, "No, this young man should have this photograph. So what can I say? If there was a fire in my apartment, Richard, I grabbed the dog and I grabbed the Preston Martin Lady Bird photograph.
And your wife.
No, I'm not married to my wife anymore. She's on her own.
Okay. But you still have the photograph.
I got that in the divorce. There was no issue there.
Well, I want to ask you, I mean, there are moments in our lives, I mean, for those of us, and I love what you wrote in the description to the book, because it's true, those of us who have this passion for the theater. I was lucky enough, even in South Carolina, to have teachers that had a love for the theater. I had a French teacher that I used to go and sit on my lunch break with, and we would listen to cast recordings. My next door neighbor, growing up, I remember when a chorus line came out and she came running in so that we could sit and listen to it for the first time. And hearing that opening music, there are these pivotal moments that just jump out at you. What was the moment that you decided, I have to do this myself? I have to be up there. I know that you talk about going to see The Great White Hope and being on that moment of looking out into the audience from the stage. But what was the moment for you when you really had to pursue this as a career? Well,
I'll be honest with you. It was ever thus. I wanted to be an actor from the moment I saw Robert Preston in The Music Man. You know, there's a wonderful, great theater memoir by Frank Rich called Ghostlight, which I'm sure you've read.
Yes, absolutely.
And he saw The Music Man, and he really fell in love with the theater after Music Man. That was a pivotal play of his. But he identified with Winthrop. He was a shy boy, and he was looking for a father figure. His parents had divorced, and his father was always working. No. I wanted to be the con man who comes to town and gathers everybody's attention. That's who I wanted to be. And I was focused. I mean, I had 5 brothers and sisters. And, you know, my parents were like, one of them knows what he wants to do with his life. We're done with that, you know? So they never put up any obstacles, except when they said I couldn't go pro. And they wouldn't take me into New York City for auditions, which was, as I said, smart of them. And then when I got to college and studied in a conservatory, you know, I got the training I needed, and I turned pro at 21, and I never looked back. The interesting thing, though, is writing has taken over my life. I started writing about 20 years ago while I was living in Los Angeles. I started writing for television because, you know, the life of an actor, you know, sitting by a telephone is hard. And, you know, you can't do anything unless you're in an acting class. And when you're in an acting class, you're working in a vacuum. It's not the same as working on a set, working in front of a camera, or working on a stage. It's not. It's a substitute, and it's good, but it's not great. But when you're a writer, you can write every day, and nothing can stop.
You write an incredible blog. I want to tell everyone, you know, follow the blog. You know, I look forward to your blogs. But you have this knack for capturing every detail of these experiences that you went through. And it really takes the reader right there. I want to talk about that little boy who used to come into Manhattan and go up in the cheap seats to see the shows. Thus, you know, the title of your book. But you describe, I mean, I came to New York in 1979.
That's the year I moved there at 21. So we sort of came to New York City at the same time.
But when I moved to New York, I had this vision. I had never been out of my hometown. Right. I had never flown before. Wow. I had never been out within the beyond the perimeters of North and South Carolina. I had this vision of breakfast at Tiffany's, Sunday in New York, on the town. And I arrived, and you described this also in your book.
Yeah.
I arrived in the middle of Midnight Cowboy, Taxi Driver, you know, cruising. That was the New York that I stepped into in 1979.
You love the chapter in my book, The Street, where I just talk about what it was like, because people don't know. The subway's covered in graffiti. Like, for instance, and I'm sure you were the same, Richard, you could not walk down 42nd Street.
I have some photographs here, which gives a glamorized view almost. This is from 1969.
Yeah, that was cleaned up.
Yes, here's another one. You can see some of the signs and the marquees and everything. But again, and here, and some of these were still in place when I got here.
Right.
But again, I'm reading this book and I'm laughing out loud at some of the imagery. For example, the beginning of that girl, when she's walking around in the marquees.
Yeah.
And even now when I watch on antenna TV, it really takes me back to this wide-eyed kid coming to New York and looking around, but that wasn't the New York that we came into.
No. Don't you love the jazzy music under that too? Oh, I love that show. Yes, I talk in the book about the fact she looks up at these Broadway marquees, but they go by very fast. And that's the days before there were VCRs. So when they finally, you could finally pause it. I finally figured out all 5 of the marquees and I put them in the book. So you can buy the book just for that alone.
Yeah, there's an asterisk there with all of that.
Speaking of books, behind me is just a part of my library, which is actually a reference library. I mean, you can go on the internet and get a lot of information, but something? There is nothing like thumbing through a book for what I need when I'm writing one of my blogs. And
all of mine are over there on the other side of, I've got the same thing. And, but I want to go back, 1974, That's Entertainment came out, the movie.
Right.
And because there was such a nostalgia craze going on in the country, and a lot of the older stars started writing biographies. And so there were a lot of books. And I would go to the library, and the librarian, Miss Lewis, Catherine Lewis, would always pull out the new biographies that had arrived. She would save them for me. So I would read them before anyone else would read them because of that love.
I'm wondering, do you have Tapping into the Force by Ann Miller?
Ann Miller.
One of my favorites.
Yes, but yeah, and I'll share my Ann Miller story with. She was doing Follies at the Paper Mill Playhouse,
right? And
we went to see her, and she said to my husband and I want to see you after the show. Do you mind waiting around? And we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and 45 minutes later, she came out wearing her street makeup, and she was wearing more makeup than she wore in the show. You talk about meeting these celebrities, and you were also, if you'll pardon the expression, a ballsy kid, getting yourself backstage and, and getting to meet these people. I'm all about celebrating, Ron. Who were some of the holy grail people that I know you met? Robert Preston, even for a brief moment, James Earl Jones. You write about these in the book, but if you can go beyond the book itself and tell us about some of the holy grail people that you could not believe that you were in their presence. Yeah. And of course, they were in your presence as well.
Well, that's the key to it. You see, I don't know what chutzpah, was just inbred in me as a little Jewish boy that decided that part of the experience after seeing a show was going backstage. It wasn't the way it is today. You have to understand, today it's all about getting selfies and cameras, and people didn't have cameras with them. And there were no big lines outside a stage door. We mentioned Ann Miller. Ann Miller was the biggest crowd I ever saw at a stage door. Not for Julie Harris, not for Angela Lansbury. I mean, Ann Miller was a big MGM star. She got a crowd. But for the most part, the Broadway actors could walk out of the theater and take the 104 bus home. You could ride the bus home with the star of the show you saw that night. A cab was an expense. These actors weren't making that much money when they were starring in Broadway shows in that era. I would go back and get the autographs, but more importantly, I enjoyed the conversations I was having. And certain actors really wanted to engage me because, when a 12-year-old boy wanders into Nicole Williams' dressing room after he's finished a 3-hour production of Hamlet, and the first thing he says is, "Where are your parents?" And I say, they didn't want to go. "Are you alone?" "Oh, yeah, I couldn't find anybody to come with me." I'm just insulting the man, But he was engaged, and we had a great talk, and of course, I got the autograph. But one day, I was in the presence of Colleen Dewhurst, who was one of the greats. And we had this beautiful conversation. She asked me so many questions. She was so curious. And then I said to her, "Oh, and would you sign my program?" And her face cracked a little. It was kind of like a little disappointment of like, "Oh, we're going to do that now." And she, of course, signed it. But while she was signing it, she was just looking down, and she just said to me, you know, I should really be asking you for your autograph. And I was like, that's the nicest thing anybody ever said to me. And from that day on, Richard, I never asked anybody else for an autograph. I continued going backstage, but the autograph became completely irrelevant and unimportant.
After the show, I'll share with you. You probably know the story as to why Paul Newman would not sign autographs.
Yes.
You know? We'll save that for another show.
I'm sure it's true. But, you know, you mentioned my blog, and I started writing the blog almost 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I know the date because I picked my daughter's birthday. It was in June. And I wrote it almost a year before the book was published because I thought I need to reestablish myself from Ron Fassler actor to Ron Fassler writer. And it would be a good way to get people excited about my book because at the end of every column, I would say my book is coming out in January. Well, we're coming on the anniversary this June of 5 years of columns, and I have now written over 500 of them. And each one is a 1,200, 1,500 word essay about theater. Mm-hmm. And I'm not giving up. I mean, it feeds me. It is given.
Well, one of the things that I did in preparation for tonight, I actually went and I Googled your name next to the date of today throughout, several years, and they're all there. And just these great stories that you share. Obvious that you saw 200 shows sitting up in the cheap seats
in the 4 years when I started, from 12 to 16, as a steady weekly thing. I went to the theater every week.
But don't you think? I mean, for me, and again, I came to New York when there were twofers, and you could second act a show, and there were it was a different world, and also the experience of going to the theater was different. You talk about your first show. Again, I was later coming to New York, December 9th, 1979 at the Palace Theater, which today is the anniversary of the Palace Theater opening their first vaudeville act, by the way. Oklahoma, 1979, Rodgers and Hammerstein.
That was your first Broadway show? Oklahoma, that beautiful ride. Yeah, I saw that.
I won the tickets on WNEW radio.
I won one of those quizzes.
Jim Lowe?
Whoa. I won one of those quizzes. I went to Vanities, the off-Broadway show Vanities. You got Oklahoma. You got a better quiz.
Well, what I would do is I would call in, and each time I would call in, I would give a different name.
Me too.
And it would be a different friend's name. And this is funny. I would give a different name, and then I would call them and say, you just won 2 tickets to Oklahoma, Barnum, on Golden Pond, Dracula. But the only caveat, Death Trap, is that you have to take me with you. And I saw all these shows for free. I used my friend Gabby's name once, and I just said my name was Gaby. I can't believe we had a scam going, Richard. Oh my God. And Jim Lowe, and years later I got to meet him, and these wonderful people. But you still go to the theater. What are some of the things that you absolutely love that has changed in the theater going experience? Obviously, that love of going to the theater is still there. And what are some of the things that you truly miss?
Yeah,
what it was like to go to the theater.
Truly hate. I mean, the ticket prices are the thing that just it just saddens me tremendously, because yes, there's a rate of inflation, but when you think about the fact that I saw 1776 and 1969 from the last row for $3, and at that same theater, now the Richard Rodgers, the last row to see Hamilton is $135. That's a 5,700% increase. I know a loaf of bread was $3 and now 30 cents, and now it's $3. That's more commiserate, but from $3 to $153, it's out of control, and also it makes the theater only for people who can afford it.
It's become an elitist art form.
It becomes an elitist thing, and it should be open for everybody. And I'm only hoping that perhaps once the pandemic has stemmed and we come back, that there's going to be an effort to lower ticket prices. You think they're going to have to raise them because they've lost so much money, but I think to lure people back, there may have to be some significant cuts. I'm sure it's being discussed. But there are many ways to see shows at discounts. But that's the biggest thing, that a child with my passion today could never do what I did. It's one of the things people love about the book, because it is truly a bygone time. It's only
it really captures that era, an unbelievable. What did you learn about yourself by the time you got to that last sentence, that last punctuation mark with the book? Was there anything that surprised you above all others about yourself personally?
Well, I took a writing class from the great television writer David Milch, who created Deadwood and NYPD Blue. And all he talked about was one phrase. He would say, "Sink your roots deep." And I was telling this essentially fluffy story about a little boy that had adventures in New York compared to the grown-up me who got to work with some of these professionals eventually that I worshipped from afar. It's my view from the cheap seats, then it's also my view from the other way, because I performed what I've learned and what these actors taught me and what the education was. All of that, it makes for a fine book. And then it's interspersed with the 100 interviews I did with people from that era. Great. But when I was giving it to certain friends to read early on in the process, one friend said to me something that really stuck and made the book so much better. She said, "Ron, your interviews are great. Your stories and adventures are great. But if I go 5 pages in the book and I've lost that little boy, I start going, where's the little boy? Where's the little boy? You have no idea how invested we are in you as that little boy." And I really took that to heart. And I really did make the little boy the hero of the book. And somebody even said to me after the book was over, "You've written the traditional boy, falls in love with girl, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl." Because I do fall out of love with the theater at one point, and I have to get it back. And it really just had its own beautiful arc naturally. And then obviously finessing it, and with the help of other people and my publisher, to make it a better book. I think we really succeeded.
Speaking of actors and actresses, one of my favorite actresses is watching Jackie Joseph. And
Jackie Joseph. I
love
her in all those shows when I was a child.
Absolutely. And she's a dear friend. And she says that she misses people dressing up to go to the theater. Now, I still dress up to go to the theater. Yep. I'm assuming that you do as well.
I like a red jacket. When I see somebody come in a shorts and flip-flops, I'm just kind of outraged. I'm like, this is the theater. This is not, it's not the beach,
Do you know what show that started with?
Hair?
Actually, a little later than that.
Which one?
Les Mis. Because it was really a touristy show, and people would get their tickets at the last minute, and they had been traipsing around New York City all day, and they would come to the theater, and just the norms of dressing to go to the theater dropped. To me, it's still a religious theater.
Yes.
And I love when you talk in the book that, going to the theater and just sitting there and waiting until everyone had left the theater.
Oh, yeah.
And then that is still a very, important thing for me.
Do you ever leave before the orchestra's finished their final note?
No.
Never. No. And you applaud them.
If people are walking out while the actors are taking their bows on stage, it truly, I feel like there's a knife going through my heart.
There's nothing.
So they work for you.
Yeah.
And it's all part of the show.
Well, they want to catch the train.
They want to catch the train.
But I will tell you my favorite story about being in a theater. I went to see Angels in America, the double header, when the Signature Theater did it about 15 years ago. And I brought my daughter, and we sat there around 2:00. The show was about to begin. And I said, "Oh, my God, I just realized something." My daughter said, "What?" I said, "It's Yom Kippur. This is the high holy day, and we're supposed to be home, and we're in a theater. I mean, this is, I hope the gods will forgive us." And I got a tap on my shoulder, and a woman said, "Don't beat yourself up. You're in a temple." And it was Judith Light, which I made the story even better. But I just love that. And you are in a temple when you're in a theater. You are.
But and I also love the story of you getting, you're crawling under your seat. This is after I do. And you're grabbing the playbills.
Yeah.
Because you want to take them and share them with your friends.
I wanted 25 playbills to pass out in class at show and tell the next day, which I did. But I thought I didn't know if I was allowed to, but I just started gathering them. And then an usher stopped me with her arms folded, and I was like, "Oh, I've been busted." She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I just thought I'd show the playbills and give one out to all of my friends in class for show and tell." And she went, "Come with me." And she handed me one of those, tied up with string. She gave me the whole thing. "Here, go home." Which, I mean, it was such a welcome to the theater. I'm in love with all those ushers anyway.
Do you save all of your playbills?
Well, I'll tell you something. If I turn the camera this way, these are the 200. These are the sacred 200 my book is about. So I have those. And then over the years, to be honest with you, Richard, I've kind of given up. They're all online now.
Mm-hmm.
And, it hurts sometimes to throw away one that's quite beautiful. If the cover is gorgeous, I'll keep them in this I've got that little playbill box there. But for the, some people can't believe this. I'm not a hoarder. They don't have the feeling they once had. Like my ticket stubs. Ticket stubs now are computer printouts. There's no beauty to them. When we were going to the theater, do you remember what they looked like? They were.
Oh yes, I staple them. I used to staple the ticket stubs to the playbills.
Right.
I still have a lot of those.
No, I have here. You'll love this. I mean, as long as we're here in my apartment, why don't we just take advantage of it? This is the box, the exact box I've had for 50-something years. It's rusted. But look at this, Richard. It's every single one of the wonderful little theaters that would have envelopes like this. Can you see this? It says
the other way.
It says Helen Hayes Theater. This is the one that was torn down. I can't really make it. And inside of it, I've got all my ticket stubs from the Helen Hayes Theater with the show written on the back. And if I moved to another seat, just so I knew where I sat. Here, I sat for the first act. I moved down for the first act. I moved down further for the second act. That show closed in 4 nights.
Oh, that's incredible. Absolutely.
Yeah, I got all of these. But of course, I don't collect ticket stubs anymore.
This
is part of who I was as a child. And it's a childish thing, but it's part of who I am. And thank God I saved it because it helped me tremendously. When people say to me, "How do you know you saw 200 shows, between the ages of 12 and 16? Well, I went home every night and I wrote my reviews. They're all in these 2 little boxes.
The reviews are there, and you also have all of the shows numbered.
Yes.
The first 200 shows right there.
Exactly. So these are my actual reviews in my handwriting. And you can see it says the play I saw, what price I paid for it. Look, it's Coco. I opened the Coco. Play number 43. I paid $4 for it. That was a lot of money, Richard.
Well, go to show number 5. Do you know what it was? Without looking?
5 would be Great White Hope, wasn't it?
Mm-mm.
No, it's Dolly.
Dolly.
It's Dolly. Well, Dolly is my favorite review because I called Hello Dolly gripping.
I have to ask you this question because we've gone through this phase and with revisals. What are your thoughts on revisals?
I'm very open. I try to be open. I was very open to Oklahoma. I thought some of it worked great. I thought some of it worked really badly. I thought the director was throwing everything against the wall for what would stick. It didn't seem to have a through line to it. And you see somebody do a revival of something and they absolutely know what they're doing. They're very confident of the story they're telling. And even if they're changing things, they're not really actually changing lines. And those work much better for me. I didn't care for the Fiddler that Bart Sher directed with Danny Burston. I didn't like Bart's direction on that, but I adored what Joel Grey did with the one with Stephen Skybell, which had wonderful flourishes that were never in any other production.
Phenomenal.
Truer to the piece. And yes,
I have to tell you, the moment that show, when you first hear the Fiddler, I started to cry, and I cried through the entire show. I couldn't stop. It was, to me, just such a moving production of, I
cried after Now I Have Everything. Who cries after Now I Have Everything? I mean, it was so moving. It just worked and burned on all cylinders. I went to see it more than once. Did you as well?
Oh, no. You mean the Fiddler?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. With the shows that you've seen, is there any particular show that you've seen many times?
Yeah.
And what with that show, what's the number one show that you've seen more times than any other? And what was it about that show that kept bringing you back?
Well, I wrote an entire chapter on it. I call it The Obsession, and it was 1776,
Yes.
the original production.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it the day before it opened to the critics. It was the first time I ever went to see a Broadway show that hadn't opened. Because you have to remember, when I started going, I was going to see all the hits.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very intrigued by the ad in the paper with that egg and the little egg chick coming out of the egg, and what was a musical about the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And it just captivated me. And, it was a sleeper hit. No one knew it was coming to town and it was going to get the kind of reviews it got. It got Hamilton-style reviews. I mean, it was
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it ran for 3 years, which in those days was a long time. And I went as often as I could.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I related to the lead character. John Adams was a part that I still want to play. I just turned 64 this month, but on stage,
baby.
These things, I'm only 41 and I still have my virility. I know I can get away with it on stage. So it might be one day in my future, some kind person will finally let me play that part. But I was obsessed with it. I went to see Sweeney Todd many times in the original production. I even went to see this recent My Fair Lady 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
It was My Fair Lady. I mean, I don't know when I'm going to get to see it again. And I wanted to see Laura Benanti and Lauren Ambrose. And, you just find the money and you go. I do love the fact that we get these musicals. And somebody on one of the Facebook posts the other day started saying about, when we get the inevitable revival of Gypsy, I was like, it's inevitable. There's no question there'll be another Gypsy.
Mm-hmm.
It'll probably be Audra McDonald. That would be my choice. I think that would be an appropriate star to play that role. But these are the greats. We're ready for Guys and Dolls again. I want to see these shows as often as I can. I have no problem with it. And some of them don't have to be rethought. They don't.
Mm-hmm.
I
love, and I've said this before, but this is my favorite analogy, and this is from Leroy Reams.
Yeah.
He said, it's like baking a red velvet cake. You and I both know what a red velvet cake looks and tastes like. But let's say that you say, I'm going to make a red velvet cake, but instead of this ingredient and this ingredient and this ingredient, I'm going to replace it with this, this, and this. It damn well better taste better than the original. Otherwise, why bother?
What's your motivation? What is your motivation, though, to change the recipe?
What's the motivation? And I am open to new interpretations. I got into a heavy debate about the new West Side Story movie that's coming out, which I'm excited to see what they do with it. I love to see where a director or an actor or an actress, what journey are they going to take me on? And also, and I'm sure it's the same experience for you, Ron, depending upon the time in your life that you see a show and what's going on in your life and how it resonates with you.
Of course. I mean, did you like the Carousel, the most recent?
I did.
See, I didn't care for that. That one felt misdirected to me. But I love the Once on This Island. That was a glorious revival. I mean, I saw the beginning of the revival craze started when I was going to the theater. There were no revivals in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
It only started in the late 60s, early 70s. And then it really hit its zenith in the 80s. And that's when they had a Tony Award category for it, because there were so many. We were bringing in 4 to 8 a season. Mm-hmm. They are our American art form, the Broadway musical. And I know that comes with, it was 20 years. This My Fair Lady was the first Broadway production in 20 years. So why not introduce it to another generation?
Well, Turner Classic Movies has been doing a great series where they're looking at classic films through the lens of the living in 2021. And I would love to see Broadway do the same thing. There are so many shows that are from a certain era that they are afraid to tackle nowadays. Yeah. And I think with a talk back at the end of a show, an article in the program, these shows can be presented to new generations to enjoy, rather than saying, we can't show that anymore.
Right. I don't think anything's been relegated to a garbage bin. That's a true classic. I mean, if you look at everyone that won a Tony Award is getting a revival at some point. You know, and there's always somebody begging, why can't we see Raisin? You know, because nothing's dated about Raisin. You know, Raisin and the Sun has been done 5 times on Broadway as a play. You know, and we always get Streetcar, and we always get Death of a Salesman. So there's no reason not to do the Broadway musicals as well. They're more expensive to produce. And
was there ever a show that you read about in the Arts and Leisure section of the Times? You read articles about a show that was coming to New York. The excitement's building and building and building, and then it somehow collapses on the road, or it never even gets that far.
Oh, sure.
What would be the Holy Grail show?
Shows that never opened, because I bought them in advance, because I wanted to have good seats to see that big new musical starring so-and-so, and it never got there. You know, Ted Chapin, who's a wonderful writer and
yes, absolutely,
organization. He loves to ask people a question, and when he asked me it, I had an answer right away. I don't know if you'll have one, but here's the question: what was the first show you saw that you sat there and went, "Oh, they're all not going to be Oklahoma and Hello Dolly. Oh, there are some bad ones." You know, when was the first time you actually sat at a show and went, "Oh, I'm not enjoying this very much"?
I'd have to think about that, because I'll
tell you mine. Mine was Joel Grey in George M. Because I was so excited to see it, because I loved him in Cabaret, and I thought the George M. Cohan music was going to be great. And in my review that I wrote when I was 12, I said, "Oh, my heart soared high and fell as fast as a bird with no wings." For metaphors. If you started going to the theater in '79, maybe you didn't care for Sarava.
Oh, I didn't see it, you know, so I missed that one.
Ballroom? Did you get to see Ballroom with Dorothy?
I didn't get a chance to see Ballroom.
9?
Yeah, 9 I did see, absolutely.
Yeah,
you know, just absolutely. And I love the original. I like the revival too, but there were elements of the original that I missed when I went to see. And also, you know, there are certain shows that you see and you go, "Oh my God, I love that song." And then the revival comes along and that song has been cut from the show. What did you think? I want to ask you your opinion of the last revival of Flower Drum Song.
I saw that in Los Angeles before it came to New York, and I think they kept fiddling with it. When I saw it, it had problems, but as I understand it, they kept fiddling and made it worse. That happens sometimes. Mac and Mabel worked like a charm in Los Angeles, from what I hear, and then Garrett Champion kept working on it. By the time it got to New York, it just felt like a stitched together piece, and it didn't have its organic core that it originally had.
Well, Maher, you know, was a fiddler,
yes.
Your pardon, with all of his shows.
That's right.
If he could go in and fix things, I mean, Equity now has put a kibosh on that, but he would go in and constantly tweak. And it was long after Hello Dolly, you know this.
Yeah.
Come and Be My Butterfly is cut and replaced with the polka.
Yeah.
Which Jerry said that he absolutely hated.
But Hal Prince told me when I interviewed him that opening night of Damn Yankees, the show was a smash. It got great reviews, but he couldn't sleep all night. And he called George Abbott at like 6 a.m. And he said, "I'm sorry, George." He goes, "No, it's okay. I'm up too." He goes, "You're up about the same thing." He goes, "Yeah, that's such and such a thing. That doesn't work." And they went in after opening night and they changed up Damn Yankees. And that was after good reviews. Camelot was another show that they went in because Moss Hart had a heart attack out of town and there was no director for a while. And it kind of limped into New York, and the reviews were like, "Well, this is no My Fair Lady, it's no Gigi." But audiences are coming because of Julie Andrews and Richard Burton. But when Moss got better, he went back in and went, "No, we should have cut this and let's do." And they tightened it, and then they did it on Ed Sullivan. Did about 20 minutes worth of it on Ed Sullivan, and the next day there were lines around the block, and Camelot ran 3 years.
Well, can you imagine Irene with Sir John Gielgud directing it?
I was just talking about somebody this week about that. Yeah. There are some things, you know, you just say, "Gee, I don't think I'll back that." The one show that I was really wrong about when I first heard about it, I thought a musical version of Little Orphan Annie was going to be a disaster. I thought that was
really wow.
That was just a stupid idea, you know. But they did it beautifully. And when it opened in 1977, it really was a return to Broadway musical comedy. Because, you know, we had the Sondheim shows and we had, you know, a few shows like, you know, Raisin 1 in a week season. And, you know, there were just some it was a tough time. And Annie came along and just was like one of those great 50s musicals. Same thing happened with the producers. Producers resembled, it took place in the 50s, but resembled one of those great, you know, Once Upon a Mattress, you know, Take Me Along. You know, it was one of those just 50s like style, fun, great overture musicals. And we need another one like that right now. I think
don't you think that audiences crave that, especially now?
I think we're going to get, once the theaters are, you know, there's going to be an announcement of you know, not just Hugh Jackman, the Music Man. It's going to be something else. It's going to be Guys and Dolls. Something's coming back. Bette Midler and Dolly. It's going to be one of those. It's going to have everything you wanted, because I think people are craving that kind of.
Now, I was reading your blog this afternoon about Dolly, and of course Donna Murphy and Bernadette Peters and Bette Midler, and there was a lot of fantasizing going on in the theater of a long line of different Dollys coming in, as the original production had.
Right.
Who would you have loved to have seen play Dolly?
Well, they were talking about some really interesting people. They were talking about Dolly Parton. Again, you know, you have to understand they have to do 8 a week. You know, you can understand why Dolly Parton said no,
yes,
or why Queen Latifah said no, or why Reba McEntire said no. I wonder if they asked Audra McDonald. I don't know. You know, they were usual suspects. But yeah, I expected it to run longer. I actually went to see Betty Buckley on the road, so I saw all.
I did too.
I saw all 4 women play it. And I would love to have seen what Carol Lee did with it, because I'm sure.
I did. Oh my God!
Carol,
I mean, chemistry between her and John Bolton was absolutely infectious. I mean, first of all, they were younger than most of the actresses and actors. Louis Stadlin, phenomenal as Horace. And based on what I've heard, I think he is the closest to David Burns in terms of a portrayal of Horace Van de Gelder. Ron, I can't believe this, but we are at the end of our show.
That's crazy.
I want to bring you back over and over and over again. And we'll just, and when that revival of Marat Sade comes along, you and I we can alternate.
I'll probably see you. You'll be in the audience for that very first preview of Music Man, I'm sure.
Yeah. I had tickets. I have tickets.
I actually, if your viewers want to know, I bumped into Jerry Zaks. He's my neighbor while I was walking my dog this morning. And the plan is
in the same building?
Right around the corner.
Okay. I know.
He told me that Music Man will go into rehearsal in October, which is a long way away.
That's good. That's good.
We'll get there.
But I want to ask you, before we do wrap up everything, what are you writing now? I know you're writing your blog.
Yes.
What can we see in your next blog that's coming up?
Well, I wrote a play during COVID, but, you know, plays, right? I had to put that aside. But it made me think it also could be a novel. So I'm working on a novelization of that. And it's actually about it's fictionalized, but it's about my journey coming. You know, I lived in Los Angeles for 30 years, working in film and television. And after my wife and I divorced amicably, I came back to New York. And, you know, I started at 21 in a studio apartment sublet on the Upper West Side. And I came back at 61 in a studio sublet apartment on the Upper West Side, and literally started my life over again as a writer and not an actor. And it's a really interesting story, and there's a lot of interesting characters. And so I'm playing around with that. And the blog feeds me, and we never know where the next new idea will come from. A writer has to write. I get up every morning and make a cup of coffee and write.
Well, feel free to either tag me in your blogs or to just post them on my page. We'll build your audience through that.
That'll be my pleasure.
You know, absolutely. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank everybody who tuned in. Please, please, please. Look.
You think alike, Richard?
No, we think alike.
In paperback, cheap.
It
says, well,
it's a great book. Go to your Facebook friends list, and the 6th name that pops up, order 2 copies of the book. Keep one for yourself and send it to your 6th friend. They will thank you for this. You can't put it down. It's we barely scratched the surface today. And also, whatever platform that you're either listening to this on or watching this on YouTube, please, 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 on whatever platform you're listening or watching this on, leave a comment. If you like the interview, hit the like button, subscribe, and share. That will get us a bigger audience. That increases the ranking with this. I want to let everyone know, if you are around tomorrow afternoon, I am going to be interviewing Corky Hale, Uncorked, A Life of Music, Marriage, and Making a Difference. Do you know Corky?
I don't.
Married to Mike Spiller, an incredible writer, incredible activist. I am so looking forward to this tomorrow. I also end every show by telling everyone to go out and do something nice for somebody else without expecting anything in return. I want to take a moment some of you may know, our theater community suffered a big loss today with Rick Jensen. Incredible arranger, incredible musical director. He passed away. And as I see all of the outpouring of love showing up on his page, I think, and this is not a chastisement, of how many people should have shared this with him while he was around. Reach out to your friends. Let them know what they mean to you. As my dear friend David Friedman says, we're all in this together, but we're not in the same boat. And you don't know what someone else is going through right now. Please, please, please reach out. And go to the theater when it comes back. And take a kid. You know, you may be bringing the next Ron Fassler to the theater. Before we end, Ron, I'm going to give you the final word. Anything that you want to expound upon that we talked about today that you just want to build upon? Anything that we didn't talk about that you wish we had? Or just any message that you want to put out to everyone who's watching now? And again, thank you for taking the time to spend with me today. I just had a blast.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for the invite, Richard. Will this be available on YouTube?
Absolutely.
Okay, so people
there.
Yeah, because I'll make sure I tell friends to watch. This was a lot of fun. I agree with everything you said. You know, I started this off with my mantra: can't complain, could complain, won't complain. We're all in this together. It's absolutely true. And to sit around and feel sorry for yourself, it doesn't do you any good. And there are so many things you can do. And we are getting closer to the clear light at the end of the tunnel. Theater will be back. In a few years, things will be better than ever. Don't forget, 2 years after 9/11, we thought people were never going to come to New York City again. They came in droves.
Mm-hmm.
At the time of the pandemic, the theater was doing its greatest business ever. And we will get back there. And there'll be changes that are probably going to be for the good as well. A lot of things have changed that we're never going back to again. Zoom is here to stay. There's going to be a great deal of energy put forth into that. We're going to have new forms of entertainment. And I think we're going to get that message that theater is great out to many, many more people than we ever did before. Out of something terrible comes something great. And Richard's absolutely right. Go out and do something nice for somebody tonight, even if you can. And if not, first thing in the morning.
Buy a book.
Yeah, buy a book.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Wonderful day. Thank you.
So long.